Welcome to Season 4 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to conversations with people from around the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Brooke Lavelle, who is the co-founder and president of the Courage of Care Coalition, a nonprofit dedicated to facilitating the co-creation of a more just and compassionate world. Gotta love that. Their diverse, interdisciplinary, multi-generational team provides training and consultation to help people and organizations build compassion-based, truth-telling, healing-centered, visionary, and transformative cultures of practice. Oh my gosh, this is all my language. Brooke holds a PhD focused in religious studies and cognitive psychology from Emory University. Welcome to the show, Brooke.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
I wanted to share with the viewers and listeners how I came to know about your work, you and your team. I was just absolutely spellbound by the session that you guys led at the Science and Wisdom of Emotions Summit. So you did a session called Shifting the Paradigm, Creating Cultures of Relationality. We're going to get into that. But some of the notes that I took, and this is like, these are your words that I'm now going to mirror back to you. Here's something that you said that really, really struck me. We can't just meditate our way out of these crises, and we can't just legislate our way out of these crises. We need to cultivate a new way of being that's relational. We need new stories, narratives, myths to feel our connectedness. So hearing that back, what comes up for you? I'm just curious.
Culture. So we were connected to that summit, that Mind and Life Summit on the Wisdom and Science of Emotions, because many years ago I worked for the Mind and Life Institute. I was part of one of their large education initiatives, which at the time we called Call to Care, which was about bringing a compassionate and care-based frame into education as the foundation or bedrock. And we were trying to bring together all of the contemplative traditions and social and emotional learning traditions and create a kind of broad model. I was like, this is the work. And as I got deeper into that work, I realized that I was in a field, and I would say contemplative studies really broadly, that was really centering or privileging the idea of individual transformation. Mm-hmm. And we talk about global transformation or systems transformation, but the theory of change, if you will, was that if we just have people, children, meditate more or develop their own capacity for love, care, compassion, all good things, that systems of oppression or domination would fall away. And it was in doing the work kind of on the so-called front lines that I was like, this is not enough. Like, this is a bottom-up approach. This is critical. And it still remains critical, but I'm like, we're not going to, that's that language. Like, we're not going to meditate our way out of these crises. Like, we're not going to meditate our way out of the ecological crisis. We're not going to meditate our way out of the racial justice crisis. Like, we're not going to. And we're also not going to do it just by starting new policies. Like, we have a new administration in the US. It's not much to write home about either. And that's not enough, right? So for us, it's like, how do we do more than just marry individual change and systems change? Like, it's not just adding 1 + 1 equals the thing. It's like, actually, there's something about culture, which is like how we show up in space, how we come together, how we communicate, the stories we tell, the cosmos that we're part of. It's building ways of being that I think are what are sustaining and supportive of transformation in the long haul. And that's everything. That's narrative, that's systems change, that's how we relate to each other. And that's like how our hearts are changing. That's like the package that we're into at Courage.
So that's beautiful. Now, you just talked about the theory of change of sort of what the work that you were doing prior, and now you are heading up a new organization with your team. What's the theory of change? I've read I think it was called a manifesto, and I'll include it in the description below the PDF because it's fantastic. But what are you really trying to accomplish? Tell me.
Yes, and that's it. And it sounds maybe a little abstract, but we're committed to building cultures of practice. Mm-hmm. And I pause because then people are like, what does that even mean? Right. And that's it. Part of it is like, I'm a white body person for those who are just listening in, raised in the United States in the Northeast, really strongly shaped by a culture of individualism. Like, as much as I found myself in community, in practice community, there's a way of moving through space, literally, that I've had to work with and I'm continuing to work with to like reshape what the feeling of being in community means to me. Being in relationship with land, with humans, with non-human species, etc. And for us, the work at Courage is, how do we build like a culture, or rebuild a culture, or reclaim a culture that centers community in that way, that like profoundly centers community, that's local, that's regenerative, that's centering like qualities of love and connection, togetherness, solidarity. Like, how do we actually build those communities that can sustain us? Like, some of the work we do is along the eco-justice lines, and the data is pretty grim. Like, we're headed for civilizational collapse, right? That's like the nice way to put it. And what many frontline researchers and thinkers are saying is like, actually really the only way to avert full-blown civilizational collapse is to build really, really strong local resilient communities. And that means like, how are we getting our food? How are we getting our water? How are we able to build, grow? Like, there's local infrastructure that's important, but how do humans tend to each other and tend to each other's hearts? Like, that for some of us feels like a lost art. And that's, I think, Courage's project is like building that local sense of connection and sense of community, where we're showing up for each other. We might not be massively in love with each other, but it's like, I'm here for your survival. Like, we're here for our collective survival. That's in a way, the really grand theory of change, is build those communities.
Yeah, because so much goes through my head when I'm hearing you talk about this. So the model of purposeful empathy that I have, I won't unpack it for you, but the outer rim, okay, that holds the space for purposeful empathy to happen is twofold. I talk about it being spiritual by nature. When you're doing purposeful empathy work, it is like the oneness, the interdependence of us all. Yes. And then it's the politics of it. It is the action of this status quo is not good enough. We want sustainability, peace, justice, all of that stuff. So I feel it's the yin and yang. It's kind of like what you're just saying earlier is like, yes, we do need to sort of elevate our consciousness and find mindfulness and do our metas and all of that. And, the superstructures, the big powers that be need systems change. But you're just talking about locating the solution within a sense of community where our natural inclination for belonging and, breaking bread together comes. Yeah,
exactly. Yes.
And so does your organization provide training or tools? Like, I understand now. What do you do? Yeah. What do you do? What are your services? Yeah. Offerings.
So I'd say there's kind of threefold. On the one hand, we do kind of organizational and movement consulting, and I can say something about that.
Yeah.
Then we do kind of direct training. And then we do kind of this awareness building and storytelling, like trying to shape this narrative and seed these ideas of relational culture, right? Within the basic training, I'll say, we take this model that we developed, Courage Rise, which is a blueprint, although that's a misnomer because I don't think there's actually a blueprint for doing the work, but it's a rhythm or path or set of practices that we've integrated, woven together in this journey in a way that we train people in and offer it as a path for both personal healing, but a framework you can take back into your community, into your organization to strengthen, like Courage Rise is 5 modules to strengthen courage, to strengthen our capacity to tell the truth, that's a revealed truth, to strengthen our capacity to center healing, to strengthen our capacity to sense what else could be. And that's this idea that we want to move in the justice world from just fixing what's broken to starting to build toward what we want, like follow love, like follow what delights us. And then embody is like, and take the risk to do that, like step into that. That's the model. And the model is iterative, it repeats. That's kind of our core training. And then we've taken that model and we mostly serve folks who consider themselves healers, activists, parents, concerned citizens who are like looking for, often it's people who are doing deep work in at least one of those sectors, right? Who want something integrative. And then we take that model and we consult with organizations like some human rights organizations. We've worked with educational institutions, trauma centers, and so on. And now really targeting some emerging political movements and folks on the front lines of really important crises of our time, and saying, how can we support you within movements? Because I'm witnessing so many people within movements I'm part of, the relationships falling apart, people defecting, really not because of policy or ideology, because we can't actually see each other. We can't meet each other. So working within movements and then across movements, because we also see everyone has their own empire now. Everyone has their own, like, can we actually build solidarity and strengthen that connective tissue between movements? Can we see that the climate crisis is actually not separate from the crisis of capitalism and white supremacy? And can we link that? And can we develop common purpose in that way? Kind of like your work, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned this word solidarity a few times, and I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that, and then also where you feel empathy kind of is thread through your work. I'd be curious to know.
And I think that's such an important intersection. So solidarity, I'm glad you invited me to share about that, because I feel like some people hear that word and kind of do a little eye roll, like in solidarity. And what does that even mean anymore? Right? Are we just hashtagging solidarity but not doing anything? Yeah, exactly.
Although, can I interrupt your thought?
Yes.
Just to say, my daughter's 5 now, and she's been to a few protest marches, and she knows her solidarité. So she does that word doesn't mean something to me. It's kind of special to me. Anyways, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, and that lineage, and that's interesting, right? So our own lineages, right? Where is that word have a lot of strength and power? In the US, I feel like I've seen it so much in racial justice circles, and like, okay, well, can you back that up now? We've been part of this international group called Solidarity Matters. So folks who are working on issues of solidarity across the globe. And for us, solidarity is like, in a way, it kind of dawned on me like, oh, our blueprint Courage Rise is actually trying to teach solidarity. Like, it's trying to teach us that we're all connected. Like you talked about interdependence and interconnection. So like, actually none of our crises are separate. And I can't afford actually to not care what's happening in China, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in the globe. Like, I can't not afford that. We can't not afford that. So this sense of like, actually these are connected. And this sense of like, these crises that many of us are showing up for are deeply related. That, like, to really start to learn that, like, there are common origins here. For us, we would say the common origin is that sense of dualism or separation. So this is where empathy becomes critical. Like, how did we separate? How do we see ourselves as like me versus you, us versus them? Like, how do we start to rebuild that connection, you know? And start to then sense like, well, what would be possible if we actually could really build, we could build solidarity between our movements, that we were really working. Like, I wasn't working with you in a transactional way to further my work, which is actually how a lot of relationships and partnerships happen. But we start working together because we realize we are actually literally stronger together. Like, our survival depends on that. And how do we do that? We do that by entering relationship that is mutual, that is like based in respect, based in integrity, and based in a deep seeing and deep learning, like inviting you into my world to see like, what is it that I care about? How is what's happening in the world affecting my people, my community, and vice versa? Like, that feels like the bridge. Like, empathy feels like the foundation actually for true solidarity.
Beautiful. And I have 2 follow-up questions. I'm going to ask them at the same time, but they're kind of big. So feel free to take like a few minutes for each. You don't have to get to both of them quickly. One of them is, do you have any stories that you might be able to share having borne witness to what happens in your training? Like, I'd be really curious to hear something on kind of a anecdotal / soul level. And then the other thing I want to ask is, you know, it sounds to me like some of the groups you're working with might share at a meta level, like some discourse in common and some orientation politically in common. So what would you say about your work to kind of like invite people who are curious or skeptical or worse, you know?
Or worse. Yeah. That is such a rich question. The question is of who is this for? Like on the one hand, we say this work is for everybody. And that can sound a little superficial or flaky. Like it's actually not for people who are committed to racism or committed to hierarchy or committed to, like, in the end, we're doing this for you too, because actually no one can be left out. But I don't see our primary work as actually trying to convince people that justice matters, right? I would hope that our work would actually ultimately benefit them, but that's not our location. So yes, it's for people who are already in the work. And I'd say to folks who might be listening, who consider themselves to be activists, who felt like maybe they've lost a kind of, or don't have a strong connection to a kind of spiritual grounding or a set of tools that are nourishing and help them sustain in the long haul, or give a broader sense of purpose. Like why keep doing this? Like people have been working hard and we've been seeing like increment, like very little change, right? So what is that kind of energy, that fuel, that orientation, spiritual or otherwise, to the world that is like, I will keep going? Like, so I'd say what we're trying to do is almost like help folks reconnect to those lineages in a way that I think are actually within all of our histories and have been hidden or obscured because of systems of domination, colonization, and so on, right? So for those folks who are like, how do I keep going? I'd say that's the word. And for other folks, it's stitching together these pieces. Like there are phenomenal leaders and change makers all over. And it's like, how do we start to build a kind of community of practice for us? Like where we're doing this weaving, right? Like we're seeing our work as connected. We're trying to like amplify, support, nurture one another. Like I think of the model of like solidarity economy networks. Like we have our money, we have our food, like that same kind of level of solidarity within movement space. I would say like come, And then there are folks, we've worked a lot with folks in the contemplative field, folks who do social justice work, who we get those two folks in a room. It's like to really start to build like a bridge almost to see how actually like our different skills are actually all necessary. So I'd say it's for all of us in that way, Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you have an anecdote that comes to mind of, seeing some aha moments or something just totally touching? My daughter watched E.T. with me, and when he dies at the end, that's the word she used. She's like, "It's so touching, Mom. This story is so touching." So now that's the word I use for when we're just like moved, It's the reason why I ask, and I don't mean to cut off your line of thinking, is only because I think that there's still a critical mass of people who are they're maybe yearning for all of this, but it's not part of their identity right now. Like they don't identify as a change maker or a healer or a social justice warrior, even though they care deeply about kindness and compassion and equality. And so I'm always interested in, possibly tempting them with like the benefit of what it means when you do engage in this way, like the reward it feels, like the cup filleth, that's sort of where I was going with the question.
No, that's helpful. And can I ask you a question?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what do you think that limit is also about? Like folks who are, is it certain kind of folks who are drawn to that work that are not seeing the political work that you're bringing forward, or?
I think, well, big question. I mean, I think so much of society is structured around the narrative, you go to school, you get educated, you get a job, and then you have a house and you have a mortgage, you have kids and pay taxes and all that kind of stuff, right? So, and all of the messages that kind of put us into that kind of orientation, it can, like we might see something that's going on out there and we might think we want to get involved, but we've got all this stuff that we've got going on, And so there is a bit of that separation and a bit of like, well, you know, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to like sell my house and move on a commune in order to, you know, like, yeah.
There's this, yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. This feminist author I love, Sharon Welch, she wrote this book called The Feminist Ethic of Risk some time ago. And in it, she was writing about the ways in which she was writing to and about middle-class white Americans. We might generalize to North America a little bit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And she was saying, you know, there's something about our culture, like this culture of individualism, this culture of do-it-yourself, the myths of meritocracy that we have, ideas of the nuclear family, ideas of success and what that looks like, and ideas of taking care of your own, that are so ingrained that what we've lost, we've learned how to do that really well, but what we've lost is this quality of risk that is so endemic to non-dominant cultural groups, to oppressed groups. This sense of like, she was saying, like, we as white-bodied folks like have learned not to engage or not to sacrifice anything that we feel like we've worked hard for someone else, unless we think we're going to get a benefit from it. Recognition, money back, a pat on the shoulder, a thank you card, like a plaque on a bench with our name on it. Like, unless we see like, oh, we get that back, it's like, well, we don't act. And she was pointing out like how so much of like that kind of psychic training and cultural training has limited our capacity to see that collective we. And so the call in she was making is like to lean in. She was drawing primarily from womanist sources, so Black feminist thinkers, and saying, you know, there's a culture of learning how to show up and act like that transcends your sense of self in this life, maybe that should transcend your sense of community in this life, but that should have like a 7-generation view. Like, I'm going to act for 7 generations from now, my grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren, right? That's the kind of level of action and way of thinking of the scope of our life activity that we need to call in. And there's something, I feel that like the story you shared, I feel that especially in white dominated contemplative spaces I'm in, where it's like, I feel like we've lost touch a little bit with that sense of we. And it's something about this like individual mindset, this individual locus of transformation, and the fact that I don't want to be just dismissive of that, but I live in the United States. Like, we don't have healthcare here. We don't have universal healthcare. We don't have a basic social fabric that if you do take a risk, or you're not safe enough, or you don't have family wealth, you don't have a strong community, like literally your own safety is at risk. Yeah. So I'm like playing with that. Like it's both the culture, but I think it's a little bit too of a kind of courage, like courage to risk, and also a courage to go learn. Like, what do you mean this has nothing to do with me? Right? Like that kind of courage you're creating. And so I resonate with that like edge work that it sounds like you're exploring too.
So you've been super generous with your time, and I have 2 questions left. Okay. One is, okay, what is the way to start building that community of practice in your own location? Like starting with you, number one, and then who you're reaching for next. Like, what's the action? What are the steps?
Yes. Find your people. So for me, I have a community that meets virtually because we all don't live in the same space, but those are my people. Those are my people that like we practice regularly. That means like we actually have a set of practices we do. We're not just talking about community. We're coming together, we're doing personal practice, and we're actually like trying to do real-time practice, like real-time seeing each other, real-time dealing with conflict, real-time building mutuality and building that muscle. Those are like my people. And that's like practice lab. And that's courage for me. But then there's like what I would say, and that could be local. We're in this process in courage now, building these local hubs. But then it's also like, who are my people like here? Who's my family, my local community? And not everyone in my community wants to do this work that I do. Like, just being real, like I exist in multiple kinds of communities. So for me, it's like, how do I continue to seed the spirit of that in the work? So in my own family, how am I like working on strengthening the connective tissue in my own family? slowly and generously trying to heal family traumas and really building new rituals that actually center care and connection. That has been like a thing that I'm trying to reclaim in my own family. And with my friends I've had for my whole life, it's like yesterday I was out with an old friend, just casually dropped in a few conversations around classism and privilege, right? It's like, and I wasn't trying to evangelize. It was really like, where are you in relationship to this? And we had this beautiful conversation, and it's like, it's more than talking, but it's like, how can we see every moment of connection as a potential encounter that either can like move us toward more of this community or move us further away? And that I feel like that work of empathy, that capacity to like open the heart wide open to someone else's reality and receive that is part of like the art of that.
Yeah. The work that you're doing is really a very important kind of middle ground between the personal growth and self-transcendence and all that stuff and the big freaking systems change that has to happen. And I think you're really onto something, because if we can find the empathy and solidarity, like we're unstoppable if we can do it at scale, right? Like unstoppable.
Yeah, I think that's our nature, actually. And I think, our nature actually is one of caring, totally, and collaboration. So like finding ways to tap into that's already here, to reclaim it, nurture it. I agree with you. Like that force is unbreakable. Yeah.
I'd like to ask my guests if they have a memory or a story that comes to mind when they were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant or felt for you.
So you can see if this fits. This might be a little like too woo-woo for you, but in the tradition I practice in, it's like it's a devotional Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And it's built on this kind of relational framework and this idea of and one piece of it is already relating to people in their deepest, truest nature, is that they're already awake. And I had come from a different kind of contemplative tradition that was very American, where I thought like, oh, the way I become more loving is like working really hard. Like I practice love, I practice empathy, And I encountered this tradition, and at first it was like, it felt like very religious and in ways that I was like, what is this? But there was something about the teachers, and a few in particular that I encountered, that it was like, there was something about the way that they were present to me. Like they weren't just relating to me as, in my ego or in my Jersey self, or I could feel them speaking to a different level of my being, that when they did that, I felt like I was accessing something else, like a more caring, loving nature that was more grounded and more stable. Like it wasn't an act. It was almost like they were awakening something in me, empowering something. It was literally just spending time around them. It was like a different kind of deeper seeing. And that to me, maybe you call it empathy, maybe call it empowerment, call it love, I don't know. But it's something about, for me, being able to see each other in our humanness, that like when we can speak at that heart level to each other, we wake something up for each other. It doesn't have to be taught. It's like we're empowering empathy in the way we love. And that was like the greatest heart teaching I've ever had in my whole life.
Yeah, beautiful. That's so not woo-woo for me. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Oh, I get to talk to you for years. Thank you so much for being. Well, okay, I'm going to say thank you now. We'll stay on the line for 2 more seconds, but thank you all for watching and listening. And Brooke, it was just so like amazing to chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Now, what if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your own thinking clutter, make that important decision, and liberate you from whatever is holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to select a coach of your choice, anytime, from anywhere. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.